Hi, I'm Alice from the Royal Park's Mission Invertebrate, the project that aims to celebrate, discover and protect the invertebrates that call the Royal Parks home. It's springtime and the Royal Parks are bursting with life, and I'm going to show you some of the plants and invertebrates that you're going to see at this time of year and how important they are for the rest of the wildlife of all the parks. As spring starts to bloom, many invertebrates come out of their winter hibernation and need quick access to high-energy food. The Royal Parks are some of the best places in London to see spring flowers, which can also serve as these vital food sources for pollinators like bees, butterflies, wasps and flies. Crocuses are amongst the first of the spring flowers to arrive en masse, and although they're not native to Britain, they still make wonderful pollinator plants and create a beautiful carpet of purple, white or yellow to brighten up the green grass of the parks in spring. Their cup-shaped flowers and delicate scent attract bees, flies and other pollinators who are small enough to fit inside the flowers to access the nectar. New bumblebee queens are reputed to take a nap inside the crocus while searching for a new nest site in which to establish the year's colony. The small blue star-shaped flowers that look similar to bluebells are called scilla and carpet areas of the parks alongside crocuses. Another bright and beautiful spring plant is the iconic daffodil, which can be seen in swathes across the park grasslands with their cheery yellow flower heads. St James's Park daffodils are particularly spectacular and bloom all across the park. The UK's native daffodil species is called Narcissus pseudonarcissus, identifiable by its light-coloured petals and darker yellow trumpet. This species is great for pollinators as it's loaded with pollen and nectar. There are, however, many varieties or cultivars of daffodil that have been bred by people mainly for their beauty, accentuating their size, colours or the shape of their flowers. Often, this is at the expense of their pollen and nectar production, so many of these are of limited value for pollinators. Then there is, of course, the classic sign of spring, blossom on the trees. Lots of tree species come into blossom in March and April, including cherry, plum and blackthorn. We use blackthorn in our wildlife-friendly hedges, which bloom with the small white flowers in the front of a large black thorns that give this plant its name. Our rosemary bushes are flowering at this time of year with small purple blooms which are popular with the pollinators. Growing flowering varieties of rosemary at home is a great way to provide food for pollinators and food for your kitchen. Gorse bushes also flower in early spring and are a great plant for wildlife. They add a splash of yellow to the shrubbery in the parks and have a gorgeous scent of coconut that also attracts the pollinating insects. Native primroses can be found scattering the ground in more shady or wooded areas in the parks. Primroses provide nectar for a range of pollinators, including those with long mouth parts such as the hairy-footed flower bee, bee flies, moths and butterflies, although some invertebrates with short mouth parts have learned to chew through the base of the flower to get at the nectar. There are at least 1,500 species of pollinators in the UK, which you'll mostly see through summer, including bees, butterflies, wasps and flies. But some pollinators have evolved to emerge particularly early from hibernation, perhaps to avoid competition for food and other resources. Many of the earliest bees you might see are native solitary bees like mason bees and mining bees. Some solitary bees that you might see in the Royal Parks in March and April are the red mason bee, early mining bee, ashy mining bee and tawny mining bee. Some solitary bees are only seen in spring for a short period when they time their activities with the emerging spring blossoms for apples, hawthorn and blackthorn. All these spring sources of nectar and pollen provide energy and protein they need to stock their nests and lay their eggs. Most solitary bees don't travel further than 100 metres from their nests, which is why it's important to provide them with lots of pollen and nectar sources. Solitary bees also need nest sites near the flowers that they forage and usually create their own nests in bare earth or dead wood. And in the Royal Parks, we also provide artificial nesting sites such as this bee bank in Regent's Park where they can burrow into the exposed earth, or these bee hotels in Hyde Park where they can hide inside their holes and lay their eggs. You can see here that these holes are occupied with solitary bees hiding behind their door made of leaves and mud, whereas these holes are not occupied. If you want to find out how to build your own solitary bee hotel, check out our Mission Invertebrate instruction video on YouTube. Possible reasons why solitary bees may not want to travel too far from their nest could be that they're saving energy, or unlike honeybees, their nests are not guarded, so if they travel too far away from their nest, it could mean that the nest is prone to parasites invading. The bee fly is a species of fly that's evolved to look just like a bumblebee, an adaptation which allows them to sneak very close to solitary bee nests and throw their own eggs inside. The bee fly eggs then hatch into larvae before the bee eggs, and when the host's bee eggs do hatch later on, the bee fly larvae eat them. So next time you're out on your spring walk and you spot a bumblebee, take a closer look because it may in fact be a bee fly. Many solitary bees lay eggs and are gone before spring ends. Bumblebees, however, are around for much longer. In spring, you're likely to see the queen bees out in search of a new nest site, where they'll go on to produce broods of workers, males and next year's queens. Bumblebees that are normally active earlier in spring include the red-tailed bumblebee and white-tailed bumblebee. There are some butterflies which are more likely to see flying earlier in spring than others. Some butterflies hibernate as adults across the winter and come out from hiding when spring days warm up. Small tortoiseshell butterflies are one of the first to be seen in spring. Their caterpillars develop over summer, feeding mainly on nettles before metamorphosing into the adult butterfly. The adult then hibernates over winter, ready to breed the following year. Comma butterflies also hibernate, building up their energy in the summer of the year before from nectar and rotting fruit. Another butterfly which hibernates as an adult is the brimstone butterfly. Adults of this species live for about 13 months and hibernate over the winter, emerging on warm spring days. Their caterpillars feed on buckthorn, so we incorporate this plant into our wildlife hedges to try and attract this butterfly. The orange-tip butterfly can also be seen in early springtime, but instead of hibernating as an adult, it stays inside its chrysalis over the winter and emerges in March and April. The adults like to feed on cuckoo flower or garlic mustard, as well as some other crucifers or plants related to the cabbage. Adults of the holly blue butterfly also emerge from their chrysalis in March and April, where they congregate around holly bushes. Holly is also a plant species that the Royal Parks uses for wildlife hedges, hoping to provide a habitat for this species of butterfly and other wildlife. Aside from doing the job of pollinating these spring flowering plants, these early spring invertebrates also provide food for wildlife higher up the food chain, including birds, bats and small mammals. In March and April, great tits are one of the most active birds in the parks, and you've probably heard them more than you've seen them. This is the sound of their song. Great tits prefer a diet of insects wherever possible, especially juicy caterpillars which they can feed to their young. Also listen out for the drumming sounds of the great spotted woodpecker, which stakes out its territory in the spring. Solitary bees that nest in holes in deadwood and also in bee hotels are a favourite of woodpeckers, who can smash open these holes with their beaks to get at the bees hiding inside. Other spring birds that you may see in the royal parks that also mainly eat invertebrates include the green woodpecker, which often feeds amongst the grass, stonechat, named after their call, which sounds just like two small stones being hit together, and reed warblers, which take advantage of the reed beds in places like the Regent's Park. The Royal Parks has a population of hedgehogs in the Regent's Park who will be coming out of their winter hibernation around the end of March. Although it's very unlikely that you'll see these special spiky mammals as they are nocturnal, it's exciting to know that they will be about. Invertebrates make up a large portion of the diet of hedgehogs, who, after emerging in the spring, like to snack on earthworms, caterpillars, beetles, and fly larvae, amongst other things. Many plants, invertebrates, and other wildlife time their activities according to the seasons, which they sense with a combination of the change in temperature and the change in day length. The seasons trigger the flowering of plants, the emergence of invertebrates, and the migration of birds, and the study of these changes year to year is known as phenology. With the climate crisis causing global temperatures to rise, the delicate balance of these timings can be thrown off, and mismatches can occur between species that rely on each other, with the speed of change being too fast for species to evolve new behaviours. For example, with higher temperatures earlier in the year, butterflies may emerge from their cocoons earlier before the flowers that they usually feed on have opened. This means that nectar from those flowers, which usually provides a critical energy source to fuel their spring activities of flying, finding a mate and breeding successfully, won't be available for them yet. On the other hand, if spring hawthorn flowers especially early in the year, the beetles which usually time their emergence from deadwood habitats might miss this feast of pollen and nectar. Another example is oak tree buds, which are eaten by a moth species called winter moth. The winter moth caterpillars are in turn fed by great tits to their chicks, and so within this trophic web, each step depends on the timing of the last. These changes often interact in a complex and interconnected way, with implications for ecosystems that scientists might not yet understand. To help wildlife deal with these disruptive changes, one of the best things we can do is provide high-quality habitat for wildlife wherever we can, such as pollinator-friendly planting, including early flower species to help those invertebrate pollinators which awake earliest from hibernation. This in turn helps plants set seed and grow, and provides food up the food chain. This is something we do at the Royal Parks, but that you can also do at home. If you want to plant pollinator-friendly spring plants to support wildlife in your garden, the best thing to do is choose varieties which specify that they're pollinator, bee or butterfly friendly. When buying plants, a good label to look out for is the RHS Plants for Pollinators, which are sure to provide suitable pollen and nectar for your invertebrate garden visitors. If you're interested in learning more about pollinator planting or anything invertebrate related, check out the learning resources on the Royal Parks and the Mission Invertebrate web pages.